Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Hello to all my listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and my show is brought to you by my company. We publish software, tools, and books for improving the way people communicate with each other at work, and you can learn more at growstrongleaders.com. I'm really excited today to welcome my guest, Casey Rossi. Casey, welcome to my show.
Thank you, Meredith. It's a pleasure. I can't wait to connect with you.
Well, this is going to be such a fun conversation because you're an expert in so many of the topics that are also of interest to me, including our mindset and intuition. But before we jump in, I want to let my audience know more about you and your wonderful expertise. Casey is a business and mindset coach, and she helps high-achieving women entrepreneurs go from people-pleasing, burnt-out perfectionists to profitable powerhouses. And Casey, like me, has been an entrepreneur for a long time, since 1991, and she has built 6 and 7+ figure businesses. She's the founder of the Soulprint method, a system that combines energy, mindset, and spirituality. This holistic approach provides extreme clarity. It dissolves limiting beliefs, improves performance, and opens the way to experience and share your full potential. She's also the host of a wonderful podcast, which I highly recommend that you subscribe to, called Women Developing Brilliance, the Spirit of Business. And it's a show that's dedicated to cultivating confidence, increasing visibility, elevating vibration, and leading with purpose. And I've had the chance to be on Casey's show. She's a marvelous host. And Casey, I know that you are also a fabulous guest. So I'm very eager to jump into our conversation. Let's start with your journey of 30 years as an entrepreneur. What are some of the things that you might want to highlight for my listeners about that journey in terms of what it's been like, what you've learned, or anything else that would be pertinent?
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much, first and foremost. And I'm really looking forward to connecting with you again, and also just sharing any wisdom along the journey. Because as you mentioned, it's been 3 decades. And over that time, it has not been this linear straight line to success. It's been definitely a rocky road, which I think many entrepreneurs, short-term or long-term, can relate to. And so I would say that, I started my first corporation when I was 19, and from there developed 9 different business ventures with my business partner in a 4-year period. I would say the biggest learning lesson in that very intro period was not waiting long enough for the idea to seed. And I think that even though this is going back to the very early 90s, and again, being 19 and just kind of learning on the job, that's what it was about. But I still see this rushed timeline even now for people that are getting into their own business and cracking into entrepreneurship. They really want results yesterday. And I think that we are very conditioned now in this instant gratification channel that we're just, programmed for a very quick boomerang. And in reality, it definitely takes time to seed. And I liken it to a gardener. When we plant a seed in the soil, we're not going out in an hour, in a week, or even in a month necessarily looking for harvest. Yet that's very different now when you can put together a website in a day many times, and you're really looking for that cash machine to jingle. So my biggest learning lesson in that period of time was being patient and realizing that things take time to actually fructify and flourish. Now, our 10th business operation ended up taking off, and that was really the sweet spot. And my business partner and I manufactured upscale gift and gourmet confections and sold it nationwide. And we ended up, out of just a blank piece of paper, creating 10,000 wholesale clients and 3,000 retail clients back in the early 90s. And that venture hit into almost multiple millions annually. So that was really the one that we kind of cut our teeth on what it was truly like to be a leader on team building. We had up to 25 employees, and that ran for 17 years. So I would say on that particular chunk of time, really being so deeply connected to your why, because one of the biggest things that I would say my business partner and I were focused on was bringing enthusiasm and passion to the table, truly understanding why we were creating what we were creating, and being very aware of that on a daily basis. For us, it definitely included spirituality. It included getting in a daily meditation together. It included taking care of her mom who had had a stroke and needed care. So we really needed to develop something that we could have the freedom lifestyle to be her caregiver. So I feel like that was the fuel that allowed that to have such longevity. And it really was that passion project that we were plugging into. So I know I just said a lot, so I'll let you comment before I go into the other pieces, but those are really what's coming to mind before that pivot then into coaching came about. But in that kind of more traditional brick and mortar sense of my first 2 decades, those are some of the highlights.
That's great. And thinking of some of my listeners who are also inside organizations, what you were just talking about with patience and not expecting instant, this looking at what can I do to contribute, to serve in a way that plants seeds that will be recognized, that will be able to be harvested later. I think no matter what line of work someone is involved with, they can really apply some of the insights that you just shared, because I think we can get frustrated and give up too quickly if we don't get these instant results. And with so much that's happening these days with, people expecting that instant gratification, it's what you're saying is really important. We need to take it to heart. And I will ask you, because I'm not sure where along the line of your journey this came up, but one of the things you wrote about recently in an article was about wishing you had had greater self-trust along
Absolutely.
the way and in the early years. So talk about why that's so. What do you mean by that, first of all? And what are some ways that you wish you had had more of that? How would that have benefited you?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So I feel that it is very, very common to be looking outside ourselves for the answers. And we have this sense, many of us in general, that someone else is more of an expert, that they really have the right way, the perfect blueprint or the framework, or fill in the blank. There's this maybe deep sense of insecurity until we get on the job, so to speak, and learn. And even then, I feel like there is this root and barrier, which oftentimes condenses down to self-worth. And that can be a very long-standing story. And I feel that anyone listening can really benefit from leaning into that self-trust more and more, which is really starting to listen to your own heart wisdom, listen to the brain cells in your belly, so that gut instinct. And it really takes us out of the mental space. And I feel that many, many times, I know for myself in the beginning, I would stay in that mind space and constantly be on the program carousel or the course carousel, learning, trying to get another certification, trying to kind of like validate and prove. And that's a very exhausting pattern. So one of the things that I really strongly took away from those experiences was, wait a second, if I just silence the noise, and if I learn to be still and look within myself and trust that instinct, and the more that we learn to lean on that, the more it comes up just like a muscle. We can dial up that strength almost like we're turning the volume up on the radio. And in that way, all of a sudden, we have this self-trust that we can prove to ourselves over and over again, because it's like we can practice on the little things and be like, okay, let me just follow this gut wisdom without having to phone a friend, without having to Google my answer, without having to go to a mentor or, go to the Himalayas, whatever, and really start to develop that muscle. And all of a sudden, you're just like, wait a second here, I have access to something. I have access to deep wisdom that if I take action on, produces a really favorable result. The cool thing about this, Meredith, is that when it comes from your soul force, your internal wisdom, it's automatically going to be in alignment, because there's absolutely no guarantee when we're taking, input. And I also want to just put a caveat here. I'm not saying that we never need mentorship. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. I'm just saying in parallel to when we need to build our skill set, that we're also building this heart wisdom and intuitive connection where we start combining reliable self-trust with it.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I actually love very much what you're saying, because I think one of my big takeaways from what you're addressing here is this idea of looking for external validation or looking for external answers to what we're seeking. And it reminds me of one of your recent solo casts, which I love. For my listeners, one of the reasons I want you to subscribe to Casey's podcast is because she's a fabulous solo cast host as well. She has so many great ideas that she shares. So the one I want to get into with you is one where you were talking about, it was on thinking that you need another stinking strategy.
Yeah.
And I loved that title. It was a real attention getter. But also within that, you were talking about having been at this event where you and the other participants were asked to evaluate which of 3 areas you tended to feel, I think, that you were lacking in or you needed more help in. I want you to talk about that, because I think that's relevant for every single person listening to my show.
Absolutely. So this was an exercise specifically for leaders and coaches. And we really were invited to dream big and almost vision cast an event that we were receiving an award for, something that we deeply desired, that we really pumped up the feeling state of what would it feel like if you were to walk across the stage, and even your listeners can do this now as well with us. And what would it feel like, when you're in front of the stage and you're receiving the award? Maybe it's for a book that you wrote. Maybe it was the audience clapping after a fantastically received TED Talk. Whatever that desire is for you, to kind of future cast and put yourself in that experience and take a minute to just sit with that and feel those feelings and really think about, like, when you pause for a minute and you're really, really honest for yourself, what is in the way between your current version of yourself and that specific experience when you were at that height of celebration and receiving the award? And we were really directed to think of it, is it a skill set or is it more of a mindset piece? And we took some time, we kind of jotted it down. We kind of brain dumped everything that could possibly be getting in the way. Is it more knowledge? Is it more skills? Or, is it really just a mindset thing that something inside of your mind is saying, no, for whatever reason, I need to do X before Y. And what was so very interesting with that, and this was a group of 40, 45, high achieving individuals, when we pulled the results, 80% landed in the mindset category, which really blew me away, my results included. And it really just illuminated this feeling inside of me that it's not more knowledge. It's not really even time. It's not that we need to practice our skills 80% of the time, that it's really our limiters are in between our ears. It is a mental realm problem. The cool part is that area is so malleable because it is activated based on repetition, which means that when we can alter our thoughts, it will then trigger our feelings, which then contribute to our actions, which have a direct impact on our results. That was mind-blowing to me. That was a huge pivot in my career where I then went very, very deep in mindset, the science behind mindset, neuro-linguistic programming, which is all about understanding those limiting beliefs and using science-backed techniques to dissolve those beliefs, to rewrite the script in our brain. That's the most exciting piece is, no matter what level you are, whether you work for yourself or you're a leader in a corporation, you get to write the script. I always think of it as the artist of our destiny. And it truly is not just woo, because it absolutely has science behind it. As you're looking at a blank canvas, you get to decide what that looks like. Do you want to live in color? Do you want to be abstract? Do you want to be impressionistic? However you want it to be, you can actually rewire your brain to fire in the way that you want it to, which again, directly affects your results or your organization's bottom line and performance.
That's so great. So let's dive deeper into mindset. I know you talked about, we go from thoughts to feelings to actions to results. Got that. But I also remember you talking about there are different layers or aspects of mindset. It's not like just one simple thing. So let's dissect that a little bit. What are the different aspects of mindset that would be helpful to someone in identifying what are the things that might be holding them back related to their mindset?
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to define mindset as not just the things we say to ourselves, which I think a lot of people feel that mindset is just about positive affirmations and visualizations. And that is one aspect of mindset. But the other piece is how we perceive the world, the pictures that we make in the world, how we relate to problems, whether we're stepping towards a problem or we take action or lack of action by moving away from it. There's a lot of varying layers and levels to it. I think another aspect is boundary setting when we're thinking about mindset, habit forming. And there is this self-leadership and discipline that literally, to me, is baked into mindset. It is multifaceted and they all support one another. So if you want to give me an example, we can kind of dive deeper. So there's some context to this. If you have anything kind of popping up into your mind that would be helpful for your specific listener.
Well, I'm just thinking if we all were to think about something that we're not taking action on right now, mm-hmm. that we're resistant to it, and it could be fear of rejection, fear of disapproval, so I don't want to get too specific about it, just because I think everyone listening has their own thing.
Absolutely. So let's take procrastination, which is just a broad issue that so many of us have experience with in our life at one point or the other. So one is really kind of just recognizing that something on your to-do list is coming up like Groundhog Day, just being very aware of that. And I think sometimes we're painfully aware of that. I know an example for me years ago was going live. It was when video was just kind of coming up in marketing, and I just had this fear of going live, and it literally was on my to-do list for an entire year. And I have no problems in other areas. So I was like, why does this feel like Groundhog Day? Why does this continue to come up? So that's a personal example. And I think when you look at procrastination, many times people are trying to be perfect before they press the button to whatever, press go on going live, press, publish on a blog post, maybe put in a proposal for something that they really deeply want. So I think one piece is the fact that embracing that we're never going to be perfect. And there is that notion of if you're going to fail forward, fail fast. And so I think that absolutely can help. One of the things that helped me actually came from the 5-second rule from Mel Robbins. And this absolutely helped me with the procrastination piece that I just shared. And for the listeners that don't know that, it's a fabulous, again, science-backed technique that is so very simple and so extremely effective, which is just counting backwards from 5. So just like a rocket ship, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and blast off. And you don't let your mind get ahead of you or have a million little inner voices that hold you back from taking action. Once you do that countdown and it gets to 0, you do whatever it happens to be. Jump out of bed without pressing snooze, hit the big go live button, whatever that task is that you've been procrastinating on, you use that 5-second rule. And Meredith, I can't tell you, like, it sounds ridiculously simple, but it is extremely effective.
That's great. I'd love to have you share where you've helped a client use that, because we kind of got sidetracked, or I asked you another question that interrupted your 30-year career. So let's jump ahead to the work you do today with entrepreneurs, and then look at an example where you help one of them with that 5-second rule.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically that pivot from after selling the confection company in 2011, I had really seen this gap in the marketplace from basically women over 40 that were looking to pivot into what was maybe a soul-sucking 9-to-5 job and going into a passion career. Many of them were in holistic arenas like aromatherapy, psychotherapy, nutrition, but they didn't have the business skills. And so that is really where this current iteration came for me, as I saw a gap in the marketplace, really helping entrepreneurs, leaders, and CEOs break into the online service space. And in that, going to your point of how do we help with this procrastination? How do we implement this 5-second rule? I have a client and she was definitely plagued with procrastination. There was just too many things to do. She had a brick and mortar in conjunction with this parallel business of consulting. And she found herself continually going back to basically kind of running the store, but in essence, becoming the clerk. And I think here's the other point. We stay in our comfort zone. This is absolutely something I personally experienced with that example that I gave you. And I also saw it with this example with my client. Like, there is a safety net of your comfort zone. You can absolutely stay in a space without pushing yourself to the edges because you're good at it, because you can do it in your sleep, because you can rest on your laurels and still be productive. And I think that a lot of high performing achievers fall into this space because they're capable of so much more, but compared to other people, they're still crushing it. And so I think that this is a little side piece, but this is where really understanding yourself and your capabilities and that stretch factor of riding the edge comes into place for your personal best, because we're only comparing to ourselves and becoming better than the version that we were yesterday. So circling back to this experience with this specific client, basically, really, we did a couple different things in addition to the 5-second rule with this particular procrastination piece. And one of the things we broke down is strategy, because it's really said how we do one thing in life or business is how we do many. And Meredith, you've maybe seen this as well. It's been my experience with you. Like, you're very attentive to detail. You were an excellent guest. You're an excellent host. It's just like there's a very consistent piece of how we perform. And so we really looked at her strategies. What happens when you're successful? Let's look at something there first. And I think this often helps because we can get into blame and shame when there's something that we're not doing up to par. So flipping it and looking at a strategy where you are successful and breaking that all the way down. How do you look at that situation? So visually, do you make a picture for yourself? We then harness into the auditory side of things. What do you say to yourself? Even if it's the inner dialogue, like, what are you saying to yourself? What does it feel like for you? And we really, in this particular example, broke it down to, she does not want to have anybody waiting on her, does not want to be a disappointment, and is motivated by a deadline. So we extracted what were the strategies working for her in a completely different example and scenario, and then overlaid the template onto this particular piece where she needed to have content done by the 15th of the month. And so that is a very illuminating thing. It's very specific for each one of us. That's one of the things that I love about one-on-one work, is that you can go deep. It's not a cookie cutter, because what works for someone may not work for you. And that's just going to continue to perpetuate that negative story in your head. We're trying to flip the script. So I think it's extremely important to go deep and personal, and then really start to pattern match. Where am I successful over here? What are the categories that I have to look at, like visually, auditorially, deadline oriented? How do I overlay them here to repeat the process? Because success is repeatable.
Wow. There's a lot of gold in what you just said, Casey. As I'm listening to you, of course, I'm thinking about my own areas. Where am I successful? Where could I overlay that to something that has been a procrastination element for me? I love that all of my listeners, even though you're saying it's not a cookie cutter, there's a strategy built in there that I think is very powerful and effective to helping us get past some of these procrastination areas that may have been causing problems for us. So I love the fact that you are drawing on a strength area. And so you're really, to me, you're drawing on positive feelings also that the person has associated with that particular activity where they've been successful. So are they bringing that positivity over to this other area too? Is that part of the transfer?
Absolutely, because as human beings, we are programmed for pleasure and we move away from pain. And so whatever we can increase pleasure into the scenario that we're feeling stuck on, you are going to have more positive forward motion and momentum. And we need to dissolve or release any of those negative feelings, like we talked about, the blame, the shame, the beating yourself up. I mean, it's been said that we have 60 to 80,000 automatic negative thoughts every single day. And the majority of those are the same that we had yesterday. So knowing that little science fact, the interesting thing is we can catch when one of those ants, automatic negative thoughts, comes into our space. We can be aware of it, we can catch it, and we can turn it around. And this will actually create new neural pathways in our brain that will then better serve us. And I like to think of it as a GPS. So right now our GPS may be skewed a few degrees over here, but when you start to be very mindful and actually cultivate this internal mindset work, you can actually reprogram your GPS to work for you, to work for your positive good, for your positive benefit. And this is the cool part about self-leadership, is you get to practice it on yourself. You don't have to believe me. You don't have to believe any expert. You can literally go, oh, this is interesting. Like you said, how do I repeat this strategy for me? How do I internalize it? How do I embody it? Now let me test it. And that's the most beautiful piece with any spiritual work, personal development work, is you are your own experiment center. You get to become the curious sleuther, if you will, the experimenter, and really test this out. How do you feel? Do you see change? Have you experienced transformation? Do you feel lighter at the end of your day? Are you making your decisions faster? So that's the cool part to me, is we get to be like a little scientist is in a lab, and we are client zero.
So when we experiment, as all experiments, sometimes they turn out the way we predicted, other times they don't. And so what would you say to someone who is not getting the outcome they had hoped for by making this change, by doing this? How do you keep them from getting discouraged or get them back on track to either try something else or stick with what they were doing?
It's such a great question. Thank you so much for that. Again, this goes back to that instant gratification. This goes back to like 1 + 1 is always going to equal 2. But here's the thing. We know that in life, There are traumas and dramas that come up. That's a part of being here in this material space, that there's always matter that's changing and things being thrown at us, challenges that we have to deal with in order to grow. So one, don't kid yourself that you're going to have perfection. So know that there are going to be challenges. And this is really where the idea of being anti-fragile comes in, which is really that next step of resiliency. You hear a lot of leaders talking about how to be resilient, how to bounce back, how to bounce forward. But this particular piece, this was from Nassim Taleb that talked about anti-fragile. He wrote the book on it. And it's really about getting stronger once we go through obstacles and challenges. We don't just bounce back. We actually become stronger when we go through these challenges. So when somebody is doing an experiment and they're testing things out, we are not looking for perfection. Nobody is grading us on this. And it is just coming in with a curious mindset of, let's approach it this way. And then being so flexible where you say, you know what, I didn't get the results that I wanted, so it needs a little work. How do I tweak it? It's just like when you're a baker, you put all your ingredients in, you expect to have a delicious cake, and maybe it's not 100%. Well, you don't just throw away the recipe and be like, now I'm going to go be a jogger. I don't want to be a baker anymore, right? So you're like, okay, well, I think I'm going to up the vanilla, or maybe I'm going to whip it longer, or maybe my butter should be at room temperature. So it's literally looking at variables that you can shift and tweak. Many times it's only minor shifts and tweaks. And so it's just being that, like, first of all, you have to be very we have to exercise self-love and look at it with grace. And I know sometimes that's difficult when you have deadlines and you have somebody looking at your performance, or you have somebody doing a review for you. I think you can still apply this in those arenas by giving yourself grace, knowing that tomorrow is another day. And if you subscribe to the Kaizen philosophy of never-ending improvement, well, then tomorrow we can just do a few tweaks and see how it goes from there. And you just continue to approach it in that way, where it's just like almost a fun game. How can I shift a little thing over here? How do I add a little bit over there until it starts to feel more in alignment, until I start to get results that feel exciting? And here's the piece that I really want to underscore. When you are feeling like you're winning, and you're like, yeah, that actually worked, please remember to celebrate, because this is something that I often see. It's something that, to be honest, is one of the most tricky things working with, especially female clients. They resist the celebration piece. They're on to the next piece of their to-do list, or they're still in that very linear checking off the productivity mindset. But that celebration is also very, very connected to our physiology. We repeat what we reward. So absolutely take that time to celebrate. And I feel like even if there's room for improvement, which in life there usually always is, still celebrate that you're showing up, that you're trying, that you have the mindset to continue to improve, and that you have this enthusiasm for your projects, your life, your career. So yeah, I could go on a lot on that particular topic. I'm very excited about that one.
I know there is so much that you just crammed into those few minutes. I love this conversation, Casey, and I want to pull a few things together. One that I really connect with is this whole thing of lightness, and fun. And because I'm one of those people that tends to be very serious, who has time to, play around here? We have things to do. But it makes such a difference to really approach something, like you're saying, as a game, and more keeping score with yourself, to look at, all right, what strategy, what approach do I need to take to make the next game a bigger win, something like that. But also, as you were talking, I was taken back to some other points we've made, this idea of not needing another stinking strategy, because again, that's looking more outside of ourselves rather than within. And I really must have you cover this whole area of intuition. It goes back to what you were saying earlier at self-trust. But this idea of where do these ideas come from for experimenting in the first place? Rather than looking outside at what's the latest and greatest, a shiny object that I can try, talk a little bit about what we can discover when we are willing to trust our intuition.
Beautiful. Thank you. So I would say to set the listeners up for maximum success, they have to be willing to silence the noise and also be willing enough and brave enough to embrace some level of digital minimalism. Because if we are continually plugging in to inputs, whatever the input is, it could be social media, it could be the news feed, it could be Netflix, it doesn't matter what the input is. On a cellular level, we have to process all of that data. And I liken it to scribbling on a whiteboard. And with every single solitary impression and input that we're taking in our day, we are taking our little dry erase markers and making imprints on what started out as maybe a clean whiteboard in the beginning of the day. When you go to listen to your intuition by end of night, it's going to be very, very difficult to decipher it or even see clarity when it's been so mucked up with a multitude of inputs. So that's first and foremost, is really, if you want to commit to even stepping into listening to your intuition, building that gut instinct on a daily basis. And there's so many rewards. If you choose to do this, there is discipline involved in that silencing piece. Once you have that dialed in, you can then put your big listening ears on to give your inner authority the first crack at the answer, right? So it's like you're putting it out there and then you're listening. And even if it's like, what, it could be a big pivot. It could be like, what's my next direction? I have no clue. I really am like hopeless right now. And you're seeing this a lot in this particular time. A lot of it is from COVID and many other things that we're dealing with globally. A lot of the challenges that people do feel stuck and they don't really have clarity for their next direction, or they aren't really feeling respected or rewarded for their contributions at work. So if it is a big internal question, you just have to be so patient again. Again, it's like bringing in that grace for yourself, also being non-attached to the timeline. So this goes back to that beginning lesson of those first 4 years when I was cultivating 9 different business ventures. You have to let go of that attachment of the timeline, because the universe will bring you that answer with patience and perseverance on its own timeline for the benefit of your soul, which is very, very different from your mental timeline and any kind of entitlement that might be laced up in there. So that's a little bit. I'm going to toss it back to you so you can continue to ask some questions before I go on a rant.
Oh, well, I wish we had another hour. Unfortunately, we're coming to a time to wrap up. But what you have shared already in just this short time, Casey, is amazing as far as ideas that can really stimulate the thinking of my listeners, to help them question, where am I rushing it? Where am I not paying attention to that inner wisdom that can provide me guidance? And it's been very helpful for me personally, because I am one of these doers that finds it challenging at times to slow down to listen, but I know there's a great payoff every time I do that. So what I want to do is give my listeners an opportunity to stay connected with you, because there's so much that you have to share. Tell us again about your podcast, your website, the services you offer, and how people can connect with you.
Thanks, Meredith. It's been a pleasure connecting with you. I hope your listeners got some aha nuggets. And this is really just scratching the surface. And so I encourage them to take one of the tips and practice with it, and just be really patient and bring in that self-grace And so my podcast where we talk about this and other topics like this is called Women Developing Brilliance. And they can absolutely catch our interview together, which was fabulous. And I also have a free 3-part video series. If they like this information, it's called Know Thyself and Lead. And they can grab that at caseyrossi.com/lead. And it's KCROSSI.com/lead. And really, my goal is to help people take these techniques and pieces and tools into their life, into their day, truly understand themselves first, because we must self-lead before we can influence others. And so it really starts internally, and then it has that positive ripple effect, not only to our team, to the community. And in my mind, we actually have the ability to positively affect the world as well.
I'm with you there. And I absolutely love who you are, the light, the brightness that you bring to conversations, what you've learned, and your desire to now help others who are in these roles of leading, whether it's their own business within an organization, to really, be able to get past those blocks that have held them back to excel. And so thank you so much for who you are, Casey. I just love talking to you, and I love this conversation. And I know it's going to stimulate, I think, some really beneficial thinking and actions with my listeners.
That's awesome. They should share it with us for sure on social. Keep us in the loop with your aha moments, because this is how we perpetuate momentum and enthusiasm. So don't keep your ahas a secret. Absolutely connect with us and share.
That's a great way to close off. Thank you, Casey.
Thank you, Meredith.
Thanks for tuning into my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out our 2 books, Connect with Your Team and Peer Coaching Made Simple. While you're there, download the free facilitator guide to find out how to implement our unique peer coaching system. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.